In today's video, Jesse, a brand designer at KickCharge, and Jess, a senior content strategist, sat down in nature to discuss the unnatural, artificial intelligence. They discussed things like how AI is used in their current workflow, where AI comes up short, how there are legal issues with artificial intelligence, and if they ever see a future where AI takes over the creative workforce. For more on this topic, Jess wrote a blog article that inspired this video. The link for that will be in the description. Enjoy. If you could give me maybe just a handful of examples that AI is super useful currently for you in your process.
You know, what you can achieve with AI is kind of somewhat limited to what you can prompt it to as well, which means you have to understand the idea you're going for, with which many of our clients, not being professional artists, not being that's not the focus of their lives, don't even really have a sound concept yet. That's what they come to us for. But in instances where they do have some idea that they really like, I think that's where you can quickly use AI to maybe come up with a baseline or a framework image and say, hey, here's the gist of what we're trying to accomplish. But like, you know, it's easier probably to tell AI to come up with something than to sketch it out for us. And it's probably a little more direct in terms of like, you know, this is someone just trying to impart their ideas to us.
Yeah.
So I think AI can be actually super useful in just shortening the timeline of communication. Beyond that, we try not to use it directly in any way. I think it stifles the creative experience as far as like what we're delivering to clients, what we're able to kind of come up with uniquely and organically. I think if we're relying on AI, which just cobbles together a bunch of things that already exist, we're not really presenting something completely new. So just as a setup tool is pretty much the extent that I'll use it.
We actually try to not use AI much. Once it generates words, they're kind of just there to either use or not use. There's not much of a reference point there, so I personally try to really not use AI even for inspiration. I think for me personally, it can kind of lead me down a path of just using what's right in front of me. So I personally, and I know the other writers feel the same way, we really try to create all of our content from scratch and really not use AI on our team.
Do you consider AI art to be actual art?
No, not necessarily. I mean, it's art in that it's taking elements from existing art and kind of putting the pixels together in a different way. So from that perspective, you know, you could, it's a visual image that renders something to the viewer. Beyond that, I wouldn't consider it to be directly art. But that's a really tough question. That's like, I'm sure you ask 100 people, you get 100 different answers.
You could almost say that all human art takes pieces from other art. Like, you know, a lot of people would say that there are no original ideas anymore.
I'd say that's also true to an extent. It's always interesting because artists, whether they're conscious of it or not, are always deriving things from everything they see, they have seen. You're taking ideas away from maybe a style that you saw when you were 7 years old looking at a coloring book or something. You never know where those things kind of compile in your mind. So in a way, we're all kind of referencing reality. But again, that's like, there's a big gray area there for sure.
Do you think AI, Jess, will ever get to a point where you wouldn't know the difference between that and the writing of an AI and the writing of a human?
I kind of hope not, because I mean, I personally think it's kind of just taking what other people have done and not putting much thought into it and just creating something based on that. I still, even if you're inspired by work that's already been done, I think a lot of times that's in your subconscious and you're still creating something. And so I don't think it's going to get to that point, and I kind of hope that it doesn't.
What are some common like clues or signs that give away that something was written by AI or drawn by AI?
I think the rule of thumb for me is if it sounds like it was written by a robot, then it usually is written by a robot. I think you can still definitely tell. I think a lot of times the word choice isn't appropriate, like the words that a writer would pick up on to not use in a certain context. AI won't be able to distinguish the context when it's appropriate to use certain words and when it's not. So that's what I personally use to try and distinguish whether something was written by a person or by a machine.
It's kind of the same for the visual side of AI, where like there's a very particular style. The more that people see AI developed images, the more that I think you come to like understand what style that is, and it becomes a little more predictable and obvious that that's like probably not generated by a person. Beyond that is generally like, you know, there's the obvious ones like AI still really has a hard time with hands and things like that. There's like a lot of like dead giveaways. It can't render tools very well. And there's just, yeah, some things that are like super obvious, but those things are getting better. I think those, you know, as AI develops, even over the past year and a half, you've seen those things get cleaned up a little bit. But yeah, some of the like the ways that shading is applied to get really specific, the use of color sometimes can be a giveaway. The way that it's blocked out on a figure or a character, and then even if you look like super close at like photographic images or something that's not like necessarily a logo style, there's just a little bit of a vacant expression in the eyes, which is an odd thing to say. There's just some odd placement of like different elements of the facial features that feel a little off. I think you can really recognize it in faces.
We covered it in the blog. There's certain ways that AI misses the mark. There's 5 key things that were covered. The first one being AI doesn't know your customers or their pain points.
A huge part of what we do, whether we're naming a company or rebranding their logo, is it's really based on what our clients come to us with in their creative brief. It's what they tell us about their customers, what we learn ourselves about their customers. And even, you know, with naming, you know, we've done things where we come up with names that are acronyms that are meaningful to our clients, so that kind of, you know, lays the foundation for the name. You just can't put that kind of stuff into AI. Or even like the logo, you know, I know we have clients where they want like a subtle touch, like even if it's something hidden, something that's meaningful to them. I mean, if you put that into AI, it's not going to be the same. It's yeah. I would imagine from the logo perspective, it would probably butcher something that specific.
I think AI is very far away from being used as a plug and play, like one-to-one. You put in a prompt and it spits out a usable logo. Mm-hmm. I think that's like really far away from where we are currently with technology. You have to have an artist that's really skilled to be able to take the AI and make that into something usable. You're gonna take hours of an artist's time to really correct all the problems that AI spits out, no matter how good of a result the image comes up with.
A machine is not going to be able to understand the word to use in a certain context. It might use a word that technically the dictionary would say is a synonym of a certain word, but in that particular context, it's not going to be appropriate. So, you know, using AI, you definitely run the risk of coming across as tone deaf or just not accurate. And again, like you were saying, you know, a writer is going to have to go in and make sure it reads correctly anyway, because it probably won't. So you're really not saving much time. You're kind of just, you know, you can maybe use it as a framework, but you're definitely going to need a writer to go in and you know, correct any words that just don't make sense in that context, correct, you know, grammatical errors.
It's really interesting from one perspective to see those things kind of come along, but at the same time, I haven't really noticed a major step up in the way that you can kind of, all right, so you develop an image with AI. Now you have all these changes you want to make because it never puts out the exact thing you were looking for. So there's some areas where you can actually like draw like a mask around an area and give a new prompt and have it change that. But I haven't seen where that's really addressing the problem very well. It kind of spits out more of the same. It's really, really hard to be specific with the changes you want to make. So yeah, I mean, often like even with the things that we develop as a team, there's a lot of changes, you know, color changes, very specific little things that a client would like to see.
Yeah.
Just the slightest change to the way a hand is rendered or something like that. The specificity of that, just AI is not at the point where you can kind of input those commands and have a real solution come out of that.
If it fixes one thing, it probably messes something else up, right?
Yeah,
so it's not
sure.
like on target.
I think it's an important note too that like the A in AI stands for artificial, and no matter what, you know, that's still something that's holding it back, is that this isn't like a sentient thing somewhere that's, you know, interpreting the prompts and understanding them. There's no understanding. It's just literally a machine, you know, a string of code that is drawing from these different libraries of images and putting them together, or libraries of text and putting them together in a way that it interprets to be somewhat realistic. And being able to explain yourself, being able to think through a problem or a process isn't something that AI can at all achieve. It's just very, very basic. It seems magical, it seems like really amazing at the kind of outset, but when you start looking at the specifics, it's very limited.
And I think like it just contradicts what we're trying to do. Like we're trying to create stories through brands, build emotion through brands. You know, how do we use something that literally has artificial in the name to do that? It just doesn't mesh together.
Okay, now let's talk about how AI is not very file friendly.
That's where it really falls short. I mean, you know, there's certain services like Adobe has its own vector art generation. I think this really gets in the weeds of the development of art, and I think often even our own clients don't really understand what happens in the rendering process, but our initial concepts are generally in the form of bitmap images, which is images comprised of pixels that were sketched in, you know, Procreate or some other program like that. But it's all pixels, meaning if you take that image and you want to expand it to the size of a billboard or a vehicle, something really large format, you're going to see all those pixels expand as well. And there's, even with modern technology, there's no way to expand a bitmap image smoothly without it getting crazy pixelated. What we do with the render process is we take all of that and convert it to vector artwork. And I guess in, you know, long story short, vector artwork is taking an image and drawing it out in a software that computes all the lines mathematically so that it understands like the line is here and it's going to still be here at this scale, and it all scales at basically an infinite proportion. So you can kind of take a vector image and use it at any scale, whether it's small on a brochure or super huge on the side of a building, and it's going to scale flawlessly and still look the same. AI is nowhere near the point of being able to render vector images, and that's actually one of the most time-consuming parts of our process is the render.
Yeah, so it kind of goes back to the question, like, are you really saving time if you use AI?
Yeah.
Dan has a quote: "If you use AI to create your tagline or your logo, you're getting a singular output. It's not able to craft a story or image that's authentically you."
Dan talks a lot about, you know, the brand wheel and the idea that a lot of people think their brand is their logo, and the logo is a huge part of the brand, but you know, the brand also includes things like your website, your tagline, all the other elements that make up, you know, your brand voice, your story. So the problem with AI is that if you're using it to, say, create your logo, it's not forecasting all of the other, you know, things that you need to achieve and create with your brand. It's not thinking ahead about the different applications, like we were talking about, you know, billboards and having that vector file to be able to easily scale an image. You might be getting one output using AI, but it's definitely not forecasting that brand story, your voice, all the different, you know, ways that you need to build your brand image.
Why can't you copyright AI art? And do you think AI art should be copyrightable?
At this point, and like Jess said it early on, it's going to be tough when this technology grows to, you know, it's going to be harder and harder to maybe differentiate, you know, what is AI created. At this point, I think we have kind of counter AI, which is, you know, programs developed to actually basically sniff out whether this was created by a computer or not. And it's looking for all of the signs of an image that was cobbled together from all these different sources. So at this point, what the trademark offices are basically using and proposing is a system that, you know, will run through an AI checker, and that can happen with text too, I believe. So I think from that perspective, no, it's going to be really hard to trademark that. You would obviously have to hire a professional artist to convert all of that to a different form of artwork if you even wanted a chance to be able to say that was created by a human.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think as much as AI advances, the technology to detect it is going to advance parallel to that. I don't think people are going to reach the point where they can, and I hope they don't, because I think it takes away from the value of human-made art.
Do you see any way where AI replaces humans entirely in creative work?
I don't think in creative work personally. I think AI is really good for analyzing data and doing things, you know, in other fields, shortening the time frame that, you know, someone in a more technical field needs to do something. Or I think it could even be used to allocate more time at a creative agency, maybe to brainstorm and sketch and do the creative work. but I don't think it will replace creatives, no.
Yeah, I would say actually creative fields are probably the most immune to that type of advancement because it's called creativity for a reason. We're kind of developing new things all the time that, you know, aren't necessarily going to be, you know, nothing that hasn't been done can be developed by AI. You know, it's we don't know what the new futures, you know, trends are going to be in the design industry or, you know, in photography or in all of these other art forms. There's always movements, there's always different, you know, stylistic changes.
Yeah.
And if those haven't happened yet, then there's no way the AI can stay ahead of the artists creating the new things. So there is the argument that, you know, nothing new is being created now, no matter what, but there's always these kind of niche things that we haven't really fully explored in human art that are going to become popular and are going to become kind of the next movement of art that there's no way of foreseeing. So I think artists are always going to be on the cutting edge of that type of development.